There's stuff a new dishwasher knows because they're new. There's stuff that somebody who's 16 knows because they're not 60, and there's something that the 60-year-old knows because they're not 16. So diversity dictates that we all have different perspectives and we all have something interesting and insightful to contribute to the conversation.
Welcome to The Power of Two, where we explore the stories of unique individuals to understand how they define success and use that blueprint to lead an exponential life. I'm your co-host Owen Baim, alongside my brother Ethan, and today we are joined by the co-founder and CEO of Zingermans, Ari Weinzweig. After growing up in Chicago, Ari attended the University of Michigan, where he majored in Russian history with a focus in anarchism. Upon graduating, Ari stayed in Ann Arbor and landed a job working in a restaurant as a dishwasher. After 6 years of experience in the food industry, Ari received a call from his friend and former general manager of that restaurant, Paul Saginaw, about a potential business opportunity. 4 months later, and with a $20,000 loan from the bank, the pair opened Zingerman's Delicatessen, a restaurant in a 1,300 square foot building with 2 employees and a small selection of specialty food. Through a non-traditional business model rooted in servant leadership, open book management, and overarching themes stemming from his Russian history degree and study of anarchism, Ari, Paul, and everyone at Zingermans have turned the small deli into a nationally renowned food landmark. Almost 40 years later, Zingerman's community of businesses has grown into 14 unique establishments with over 750 employees, grossing over $60 million in annual revenue. Aside from the original deli, Zingerman's community of businesses now includes a bakery, a Korean restaurant, a creamery, a location for departmental training, and an event space, among others. While no two of its businesses are alike, each share the same vision and guiding principles that deliver the highly coveted Zingerman's experience. In addition to his work as the CEO of Zingerman's, Ari is also a prolific writer who has published his own series of books, travels the world to teach other organizations about Zingerman's guiding principles, and is the recipient of many awards, including in 2017 being named one of the world's 10 top CEOs that lead in a totally unique way by Inc. magazine. In this episode, we discuss the importance of writing out a detailed vision, what leaders can learn from anarchism, and how offering free refills on French fries has saved the company thousands of dollars a year, alongside much more. Additionally, Ari discusses how their unconventional business model has shaped Zingermans into the culinary powerhouse it is today. This week on the Power of Two podcast, Ari Weinzweig.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Ethan Baim, here with my brother Owen, and today we're joined by the incredible Ari Weinzweig. Ari, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, for those of you that don't know at home, Ari has been a founder of many businesses that are all part of the Zingermans community businesses, and he is also an author. Owen and I actually purchased his books and read through those. So, if you are looking at starting a business or want to learn more about Ari's approach to everything that we're going to dive into, definitely pick those up and give those a read. But the first thing that I really wanted to dive into was in the Building a Great Business book, you mentioned and made a clear distinction between having a vision and having a strategic plan and how they are different. And you made it clear that it's important to write down your vision. Can you talk about that distinction between those two and why it's so important to physically write a vision down?
Yeah, I mean, and all this, of course, is just my take or our take here. You know, it doesn't mean other people have to do what we're saying. But as we define it, and everybody gets to have their own definitions, but a vision is a description of what success is going to look like, feel like, sound like, in our case, taste like, at a particular point down the road. So if you're starting a business, your vision would, detail what your business feels like. What do the staff feel like? How do the customer view you? What do you do? It would include some metrics so that you'd have some idea of scale and scope. So not, to the penny, but if you're doing $1 million in sales is totally different than if you're doing 100,000, which is totally different than if you're doing 100 million, right? And there's merit to all of them. It's just having some sense of what you want to create and describing that so that other people around you who you're working with, your partners, your staff, your vendors, your community, ultimately have some idea of a pretty good idea of where you're actually going. The strategic plan, as we look at it, is more how you get there. So the vision, we often say, is the what, and the plan is the how, right? So we don't really work on a plan until we've already decided where we're going,
Right.
which only makes sense in the same context as, if you try to figure out how to pack for a trip, but you don't know what the trip is, it's a little difficult.
So you initially wrote your first vision, and it was a 15-year vision mapping out the future of the company. And that brought you right up to about like 2007, where you wrote your second 13-year vision that took you through 2020. Now we're currently at 2020. So I assume that you already worked on your next vision. So
Yeah.
what is that vision for Zingerman's for the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, to be clear, there's a essay in that same book called 12 Natural Laws of Business, and it's my belief that any healthy, successful organization, because nonprofits are really, in my mind, not any different than businesses. They just have a different uh, financial structuring. But uh, in any healthy organization, whether it's a basketball team or a university or a business, or has a vision of where they're going. Now, whether they actually write it down or not is a different story. So when in '82 when we opened, I mean, Paul and I, in hindsight, clearly had a vision. We just didn't write it down. We didn't know anything, about visioning the way that we do now. Um, so that really was the first one. Um, and it was really when, Paul sort of had an intuitive realization that we had essentially fulfilled that original vision that we sat down and actually, for the first time, wrote out a vision and learned the process, at a very basic level, but learned the process that we now use so regularly. To answer your question directly about, so we actually have a 2032 vision that we've been working on for, I don't know, a year and a half. That's probably 96% done, and we were actually supposed to roll it out last week, but given the current state of the world, uh, a few other things have preempted that in terms of priority. So it's a little on hold. So it's not totally finished, but we've got it mostly done. If the world calms down at some point and we can go back to business in some form that resembles normal, then we can start getting back to work on doing that.
Awesome. And is it possible to get a little sneak peek of some of these things that are going to be happening in the next 12 years for Zingerman's?
Well, it's still a draft, so I guess anything could change. But going from memory, because I don't have it in front of me right this second. But our visions. I mean, which from the book, but people might not realize our visions are pretty long. They're pretty detailed descriptions. So the 2020 vision is about 9 pages long, and this one's probably about the same. What are some of the things it talks about? It talks about working in harmony with nature. So that would mean working more in harmony, more and more in harmony with nature ecologically, but also uh, enhancing and building on the work that we've already done. What I think is operating in harmony with human nature by honoring the people in the organization as the unique beings they are and helping them to become themselves ever more effectively. It talks about starting to do a lot more work with kids in terms of or young people in terms of teaching the processes that we already teach, because I believe there's no reason you can't teach visioning to 7-year-olds, and there's no reason not to teach young people about energy management or servant leadership or how to run meetings. Those are all really life skills that I wish I would have learned at 10. It would have made my life a lot more effective. So there's stuff about that. Uh, there's also, of course, talks about our food and our service and how we make those better, and our finance. It talks about starting to open non-food businesses for the first time.
Wow.
And it does restate our commitment to staying just here in the Ann Arbor area, uh, which is a very important thing for me and others.
Right.
So there's more, but that's a good quick synopsis.
Yeah. And I know Zingerman's is just from being a student at University of Michigan, Zingerman's is super invested and involved in the community. And we will definitely dive into that later on in the interview. But I wanted to talk to you about something you just mentioned about the craziness that's going on in the world right now. And
Yeah,
as Zingerman's, Zingerman's, the deli being open for 38 years, that's been a long time. You guys have survived some pretty crazy events throughout
never
your time.
survived this one before. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what has been some of your secrets that have allowed you to kind of weather the storm and in these times of crises stay open, stay afloat, and now with this craziness and everyone kind of staying inside? I know you have other businesses that aren't necessarily the deli, but how do you handle that being in the food industry?
It's we're a long ways from through it. It's going to be an interesting 2 months, 6 months, 10 months. I don't know. But anyway, I mean, I think ultimately the things that one does, every day for long periods of time. So whether it's systemic stuff, beliefs, culture, etc., those are the things that under stress people will revert back to those. And so if you have an unhealthy organization, then in an extremely dire, difficult situation, people will start to come apart. I mean, they fall back on old antagonisms, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, hopefully, imperfectly, we've worked to help people learn to collaborate, stay positive, stay focused, be generous, believe in them, in their colleagues, et cetera. And that's kind of what's happening. But realistically, none of us, I don't think anybody clearly at any level planned for this, and so it's not like we have the answers, and it's pretty much upended everything. So
Yeah. And I know you've built up a really strong infrastructure for yourselves and your employees. And I know some of that is rooted in what you studied at Michigan, your Russian studies. Is that, and you talk a lot about servant leadership, is all that something that you saw in practice when you were coming out of college? Was there another
no, I never
restaurant?
even heard of it.
Gotcha. So that was
Well,
completely,
I didn't go in. I didn't go into. I mean, we didn't open when I got out of college. That was 4
yeah,
years after I
right.
finished school. So, I mean, I only got into the food business by accident, really, because I needed a job, and one of my roommates was waiting tables at a restaurant. And after applying 3 times, ultimately the only job I could get with them was washing dishes. So that's how I started. But I didn't have any big ideals about what I was going to do other than pay my bills and keep going. Um, but servant leadership, no, we learned about it. I don't know, maybe 10 years after we had opened. It came from Robert Greenleaf's book, Servant Leadership.
So, can you dive into a little bit your business model and how servant leadership has kind of correlated with the success of Zingerman's community of businesses?
Well, business model and servant leadership are probably two different things. But I mean, obviously everything's related. But servant leadership, like I said, comes from Greenleaf's writing. His book came out, I think, in 1979. It was written not just for business, but also for nonprofits and educational institutions. Um, he The basic premise of it, or our takeaway from it, I mean, the basic premise is essentially that the leader's number one responsibility is to serve the organization, not the other way around. Which might seem, when one says that, everybody kind of nods their head. But if you really look at it, in general, people start businesses to serve themselves and not to serve the organization. So what that would imply is essentially Paul and I, we're paid in order to help the organization get to greatness, and as part of that is to help the people in the organization get to greatness. Uh, it's essentially, long before you were born, but John Kennedy's famous statement: "Ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country." And then what we've done with servant leadership and then a lot of these approaches is to take them out of inspirational philosophical statements and turn them into practical steps or lists that people can learn how to do and feel good that they're actually doing what they're supposed to do. So we have 6 elements of servant leadership, which I wrote about in part 2 of the book, which is on leadership, which I can get into if you want.
Sure. If you don't mind diving into that a little bit.
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, so these are the 6 that we say in our organization. If you're being an effective servant leader, you're doing these 6 things. You're providing vision, which you already touched on, because we use vision not just for the organization overall, but for everything. It's pretty clear to me that it's a skill. It's a approach that everybody who's succeeding in pretty much anything has, whether it's parenting or writing poetry or leading a sports team. The leader always has a vision, and hopefully the people and the group share the vision if it's going to be effective. The second thing is to give service to the staff. So literally when I go to work every day, I think about the people who work in the organization as my customers, and literally all the same things that apply between me and you as a customer would apply between me and them. The third thing is to manage in an ethical manner, which sounds straightforward, but I think mostly in the press people focus on like super unethical things, stealing or
Right.
murder or whatever, but those aren't really the difficult issues. The difficult issues are what we have right now. And you asked about what's going on. We furloughed 300 people last week, which is horrible. But we're in the same boat everybody else is, which is if you don't act quickly, we're not going to be here for people to have a job permanently.
Yep.
And that's the kind of ethical struggle that's, trying to find the right path through a difficult and uncharted waters. I guess you can't have a path in waters, but the right route
Right.
through uncharted waters. The fourth thing would be actively learning and actively teaching. The fifth is to help the staff succeed. So this is really where, instead of what most organizations have, which is that the staff are hired to help the leader, this is where the leader's hired to help the staff. So my job essentially is to help everybody who works in the organization get to greatness. And if I do that well, then I think it's implicit that, I or Paul and I or whoever are also going to be getting to greatness. And then the sixth one is to say thanks. So to essentially lead the way in making it an appreciative organization.
Awesome. And I want to touch on that fifth point a little bit more. I know in your books you said the CFO doesn't necessarily know anything more than what the dishwasher knows. They just know different things. And one of the other business principles that you guys practice, which I didn't really know much about before reading your books, was open book finance. Can you talk a little bit about open book finance and what that means to Zingermans and if it can be applied to other types of organizations?
Yeah. And to be clear, I mean, what you said is accurate. I'm not saying the CFO doesn't know a lot. It's just there's stuff a new dishwasher knows because they're new. There's stuff that somebody who's 16 knows because they're not 60. And there's something that the 60-year-old knows because they're not 16. So diversity dictates that we all have different perspectives and we all have something, interesting and insightful to contribute to the conversation. Open book is essentially, I guess, based on, to a great extent, based on that belief. We didn't start it. Again, we learned it from other people, the folks at Great Game of Business or Springfield Remanufacturing in Springfield, Missouri. But it's essentially a system where you involve everyone in the organization in the running of the business. And in order to do that, they need to see the numbers. So you're actively sharing sales, profit, cash, all those things in the belief that then people can make better decisions and also that they can contribute insight into doing things more effectively. The old model, which is what, 98%, 99.8% of the world is using, is where basically only the owners or the owners and managers or whatever see the real numbers. Everybody else just gets told to work harder.
Right.
So, it's a little bit, I always say it's like a basketball game, but only the coach knows the score. And the same team's been playing for 10 or 20 years and they just get yelled at to play harder every once in a while. but they don't know where the 3-point line is. They don't know where the out of bounds line is. They don't know really how the game works. They just get told to play harder and harder, which even just saying it sounds silly.
Right. And do you mind talking about the story of and explain to our audience the story about the dishwasher and noticing the fries and it being like too big of a portion?
Sure. No, I don't mind. I'm happy to tell it. Well, I mean, the whole point is that, it's not like literally everybody's in the room. And right now with the coronavirus, we're challenged by not having the opportunity to have people in the room. But anyway, in the big picture, the idea is you're involving everybody. And so, we had a situation which is recurring in restaurants, but was particularly predominant in the early months of the Roadhouse, which is again not uncommon in new restaurants. And so they started to track waste. And one of the systemic principles of open book management is you track key metrics, some of which might be on your financial statements, but other ones like waste or check average in a restaurant wouldn't be on there because they're not on financial statements, but they're really important metrics for running the business. And, who better to look at what waste is than the dishwasher, because he or she sees pretty much all of it, getting thrown out. And, because one of the biggest things that was getting thrown out was French fries, relatively quickly, the group figured out, that if we just offered free refills, cut the portion in half and then offered free refills, everybody would be happy, right? So for the 1 out of 10 that really wanted that many fries, they could still get them. For the other 9 out of 10 or whatever that didn't want them, they were going to be satisfied. People wouldn't be freaking out about the portion size because they know they could just get as many more as they want.
Right.
And the truth is, it's better quality too, because some foods like a burger still tastes really great when it's down to the last 3 bites and it's at room temperature, but fries at room temperature and fries hot really aren't, I don't think, the same uh, quality of an eating experience, right? So this
Agreed.
really was a situation that worked out well because everybody won.
Right. And then another thing that really stood out to me when we're talking about the 12 natural laws of building a great business was in the seventh one, where you talk about successful businesses do things that others know they should, but generally don't. And you talked about how before the bakery opened, when you guys were
Yeah.
looking for the best bread in the Ann Arbor area, and you found a spot that was 45 minutes away, and that was the place you
Yep.
ended up going with, and you made that trip, you said 3,800 times. That was just amazing to me that you guys were so dedicated that you drove every morning. It was 45 minutes one way, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so you made the hour and a half round trip every morning to be
Yeah.
open at
Well,
7
plus you
a.m.
got load time and unload time, so it's probably 2 hours. And it wasn't like me or Paul. I mean, once you got going, it wasn't me or Paul every single day, but we paid somebody to do it.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, yep.
I just wanted to say that was crazy to me, and I think that that's something that definitely a lot of people that don't know what's going on behind the scenes might not notice that, but that's so special, and I think that definitely is so important to making Zingerman's what it is today, and definitely represents what you guys stand for, going above and beyond.
Well, and I think that, yeah, thank you. I mean, but I think the point is, in addition to what you're saying, I mean, I think the point is that it's really true for anybody as an individual. There's nothing to stop people from spending less time watching football games and reading more books. And I'm not putting value judgment. I grew up watching football games, but if you truly want to master a subject, keep studying, right? So and I'm not saying don't do other things, and I'm not judging, whatever. But the point is, if it's mostly ourselves that holds ourselves back. And uh, clearly right now we're all faced with a natural disaster, really, I guess, that we don't know what to do about. But in general terms, it's really more our own decisions that are getting in the way.
Right. And you're a big reader, constantly learning and improving yourself. And I know you mentioned before
Yeah.
The Great Game of Business. That was the book that first really opened your eyes to open book finance.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and I know you have a huge list of book recommendations in the back of the book that you wrote.
Yep.
But what is one
Thanks for
singular?
reading. I like that you looked at that closely.
Yeah, of course, of course. But I guess what is one singular book that any kid around our age, any college student could pick up right now and learn a great deal from?
Other than the ones I wrote?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a million of them. It depends on what they want to learn about. I mean, I guess it's hard to answer without having some subject at hand.
Yeah.
But you can just read off the list that I wrote about in the back. But there's a ton to learn. I think you can learn from everybody is really the point.
And learning is something that's obviously a big part of your life. You're a huge reader
Yeah,
and writer. But something that I thought is really interesting is you journal every day. What
yeah.
exactly do you journal about, and what are the reasons for your journaling?
Well, I wrote about that in part 3 of the book, which is on managing ourselves. It's a technique that I grudgingly started to do almost 30 years ago. But now I swear by it. I do it every morning. I did it this morning. It's just 15, 20, 25 minutes, whatever, of basically free thought, just getting put on paper. It's just super helpful in terms of emptying my brain and getting myself somewhat centered, never perfectly, but somewhat grounded for the day. Uh, Helping me, I don't know, just put together clarity around where I'm at, what's going on in my head, what's going on around me. Sometimes it's as mundane as remembering something I forgot to do, but it's just sort of putting stuff out of my head so that there's more space in my head to get clarity on the 8 million things that are going to fill it up over the course of the day.
Yeah, so you're obviously a extremely busy man. I mean, you run a business that
Everybody
employs
is.
very true. But you specifically run a business that employs over 750 employees. So would you
Hmm.
say that like your journaling and the run that you go on every day, is that the type of stuff that you do to like clear your head and to make sure that you're focused throughout the day?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For me, that's what everybody's different. I have a lot of friends who do yoga. I don't, but clearly it's a super helpful practice. People do different things that work for them, but I think the point is just, I wish you asked about being 20, what you would read. I mean, I wish I would have known half of this, a tenth of it when I was 20, but, it's just that one needs to work on oneself and that the relationship one has with oneself is ultimately probably more important than anything else, and finding ways to get grounded and centered, uh, which requires some solitude, requires some self study and all that sort of thing, which I didn't learn in school and I didn't learn in my family, uh, really help a lot.
And going off school and education, and your studies at Michigan and Russian history, specifically anarchism, what would
Hmm.
you say the best thing you learned from your studies on anarchists, and how is that contributed to the successes of Zingerman's?
Well, the best thing is not to look for the best thing because it's to not think hierarchically.
Yes, can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So, we pretty much all of us are raised, I would suggest, in hindsight, to think hierarchically. So, I'm not being critical. It just leads to questions like what's the number one thing? What's the best thing? Who's the best? Strive to be the best, you know, be above average, et cetera, right? So, when you're thinking hierarchically, it's so common that people don't even know they're doing it. So I didn't make this story up, but it's the little joke about the two fish swimming along, and the one fish says to the other fish, talking about a third fish who's not there. They're like, he's like a fish out of water, and the other fish says, "What's water?" So it's so common that people don't even realize that they're doing it, but it's actually unnatural because in nature there really isn't a hierarchy. Everything matters, even if it's tiny. It can have, like right now, the coronavirus is invisible, and as a percentage of matter in the universe, it's infinitesimal, yet it's completely upended the entire world. So learning not to think hierarchically, not to look for the singular solution, not to look for the one secret, not to look for the most important thing, but to start to understand the nuances and the little things and that they all matter. And then in terms of the organization, it helps people get out of this mindset that only like the charismatic boss is important, and to understand that, you know, the newest employee you have could be on the phone talking to your biggest client because they happen to answer the phone, and their bad service could lose you $1 million a year client, or conversely win you $1 million a year client.
You obviously dedicate a lot of time, and that's something that you talk about a lot, is not just showing that you care, you actually have your presence in the room to show that you care. And one of the things that you and Paul do is you guys personally lead the new staff orientation. One of the two of you lead it every single
Yeah,
time. Why exactly do you feel that's so important?
you guys are good readers. Why do we do it? Well, as you know from reading, I mean, I think there's a ton of stuff. It's actually one of the paradoxical problems of the current situation is, well, I guess there aren't really any new staff, but I mean, we've stopped teaching classes because we, don't have people in the room. But, I think this is proven by decades of experience, by just sitting down with a new employee and just, might be three at a time or 30 at a time, but just sharing with them where we're coming from and why we're going there and being real with them, sharing that vision that you asked about at the beginning of our conversation, sharing our history, some of the stories like about the bread, if that's relevant, sharing where we've screwed up. All of those things are important. And when they hear about it from the owner or the founder or whatever, it's, with all due respect to somebody else who's going to present it for you, it's not the same, right?
Right.
And similarly in that class, it also gives a chance to hear just even 2 minutes of their story, like who are they and how did they get there and why are they working here. And it's almost always like almost every single one of them has some other part of their life that's fast, whatever. They design video games, they're a sculptor, they're a trapeze artist. Like, it's just people have all sorts of interesting things happening that in most settings at work, for a frontline person, no one would ever even know about. But really, in the same context as getting out of thinking hierarchically, you start to understand all of those have merit and all of those have value to the organization if we can figure out how to put them to work.
100%. And I do think it's extremely impactful, and it shows your like new staff how much you guys care about your business by showing your presence physically. And that's really
Hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
I guess switching gears a little bit here, I wanted to talk about just from personal experience walking into Zingerman's Deli or the Roadhouse, and you guys just have this awesome aesthetic, and all of the artwork and handwriting and everything is just so
Hmm.
consistent and very different from things that you see in other restaurants and other businesses. Where did that come from? And
Well, it just originally just came out of necessity, which a lot of good things come from, which is we didn't have the money to pay for anybody to do fancy stuff. So we just, either had friends or employees when they weren't busy, just start to make signs or whatever by hand. This is long before computers were something that you could carry around with you and do artwork on. They existed, but they were like a block long. So it was really just the cheapest, most practical way to get it done. So that's where it came from. And then, over time it became, part of our look or whatever. Uh, and, of course, ironically now we pay people a lot of money to make them all by hand. Whereas you can do, food photography that used to cost $5,000 to get a photo shoot now, in 6 seconds on your phone, but it is what it is, right?
And one of Zingerman's guiding principles is being an active part of the community. And we know you do
Yeah.
stuff with like food gatherers and um, incredibly donating 10% of your previous year's profits. Can you talk about
Hmm.
like what it means to the Zingerman's community of businesses to be a big part of the community?
Well, I think every organization is part of the community, whether they acknowledge it or not, or whether they are a healthy part or an unhealthy part. We're all in the community. And I've, in part 4, which is the power of beliefs of business, I started to write a fair bit, and I've actually got another essay that'll eventually get written about this in more depth, but just starting to look at organization like ecosystem, and then understanding that not only is Zingerman's community of businesses an ecosystem, but of course every business within it is its own subset of or small part of the ecosystem. And then we don't exist in a vacuum. We're part of a bigger ecosystem, right? So realistically, it's almost impossible to have a super healthy organization in an unhealthy ecosystem, to understand that we all have responsibility for helping to make the ecosystem healthier, right? Which means inevitably some people have less of X and some people have more of X. It's just the way it is. And so the more equitably we, freely choose to share that, then we help the people around us who are in need, right? Which is always going to be the case. And, if you think you're not going to be in need, wait for a coronavirus.
Yeah. And circling back to something you mentioned before about how in your vision for 2032, it's really important for you guys to stay local to Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, without judging others, I just have a very strong belief that it's different when you're doing business in a place you are. And I don't mean you have to be there every minute of every day, but, if you, like when you look at sort of the mass market, they're just dropping down stores, which is, they're not really any different whether it's in Montana or Southeast Michigan. And it doesn't make sense because the ecosystem is completely different, right? So in the same way that industrial farming just imposes itself on the land and, this is what we're going to do. So we turn Kansas, which wasn't meant for wheat, into wheat fields, which turns it later into a dust bowl, which, in the depression, which hopefully we're not entering one right now. It's the same with business. I mean, I think it's important to be part of the community and to be able to uh, honor it and to be making decisions based on what's happening in the community, not based on what somebody told you from half a world away.
Yeah. And out here on the East Coast in the Philly area, we have these small, I guess, relatively small chain of convenience stores, even though I don't even know if you can call them that. Wawa. I don't know
Hmm.
if you've heard of them.
Hmm.
But
I have, yeah,
yeah, but they actually, there's a lot of parallels between how they treat their business and what you guys do in
yeah,
terms of just very, very controlled, slow growth, practicing similar principles of servant leadership. Have you seen an increase in similar business practices in more
yeah.
recent
I mean, I
times?
think that's why they're natural laws of business, because I think you're going to find that all the healthy organizations, they don't have to use the terminology I wrote about, but they're essentially doing those things. And, is everybody doing them? No. Can you make money not doing them? Absolutely. In some ways, you can make more money more quickly by not doing them, in the same way that strip mining or, those sorts of things can extract a lot of money from an ecosystem. But if you're thinking holistically and long term, it's not a good move. It's the same thing, so you can certainly make more money, but if you treat your employees poorly and they go home enraged every day, uh, that negativity, that spiritual poison is being passed into the community, and it's showing up in the school system. You know, it's everywhere. And so ultimately, in the same way that factories exploited the environment to make money and then left the mess behind for the people who were there, it's the same thing. I mean, it's not healthy, it's not helpful.
Yeah. And one of the most common phrases we hear in business, or especially in the food industry, is the customer is always right. Is that a true statement?
No, everybody knows it's not true. What we say is the customer's not always right, but we're going to act like they're right anyway.
Gotcha. I like that.
Can you take our audience through the 4 steps that you mentioned when a customer has a complaint?
Yeah, there actually are 5 now. So first step is to acknowledge what the guest is saying to you. So it's a simple, literally acknowledgement, oh, or wow, or something along those lines. The second step is to apologize, uh, and not to get caught up in arguing or proving who was right, but just to say you're sorry. The third is to fix it in some way, either yourself or to get help. The fourth is to thank them for complaining. And then the fifth one is to document it so that we start to capture a little bit of data and can do a better job of watching for trends and patterns for future change.
That's awesome. So going back to your community of businesses, each one
Yep.
is unique. You don't
Yep.
um, like to copy the formula that you use for each business.
Yeah.
But how are you able to go from something like a deli to something like a Korean restaurant? How do you have those skills to be able to open up two completely different types of food restaurants or a creamery?
Well, depends on how you look at it. I mean, within the deli, you have food that I didn't grow up with, bacon, cured ham, depending on the lens one chooses to look through, those are completely different than serving corned beef, right? So we have managing partners in each business. The idea is that the business reflects their passion. So Ji Kim is from Korea, so she knows Korean food. The commonalities are the approaches to business, the philosophies, the values, the visioning work, the service work, et cetera. So trying to take those and put them into place in different settings.
Great. And something that I was wondering about, and you mentioned now, like there's the additional fifth step of when a customer has a complaint.
Yeah.
How has technology played a role in the evolution of Zingerman's and Zingerman's community of businesses?
Well, it's allowed me to be talking to you while standing outside, walking in our backyard. Uh, it's the same role as everywhere else. I mean, I think in the 2020 vision, we wrote about intentional technology, which, in current context probably seems like a throwaway because it's impossible to function in the modern world without it. But at the time we wrote it in '07, we were still somewhat, I think, or maybe I personally biased against technology because so much technology was used to demean the quality of food in the 20th century through industrial methods. And we chose intentional in order to you really say we weren't trying to be cutting edge, but we were more just trying to find, ways that we could use technology to improve the quality of the workplace or improve the quality of the food or the guest experience. And that we sometimes that was really old stuff. So like for the last 2 years, we've been fresh milling grain at the bakehouse, which is, 16th century technology or whatever, but it's made a huge quality improvement. Um, in the new vision, I don't think it's even going to come up because it's now so, mundane. But anyway, yeah, I mean, clearly it's helped. I mean, just being able to make a phone call from the car.
One of the things that you claim is that there's an energy crisis in the workplace,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you say it's manifested with apathy, disengagement,
Yeah.
disinterest in the workplace.
Yeah.
So, you to our young audience, can you explain,
Even to your old audience.
or our old audience,
Yeah.
how important is it to get into an industry or to work in a place that you feel very passionate about and enjoy going to?
Well, I think it's really, I mean, life is short, as we're experiencing and being reminded of right now, even more than ever. But, to spend time, I mean, obviously people, need to make a living and you need to pay bills. So I'm not saying we don't do things that we're not always enthused about, but I think as a general approach to life, being in relationships that are not rewarding, that you're not honored and respected, and that you don't feel good about, whether that's out of work or at work, is rarely a good thing, right? So uh, I think in the context of what I wrote, it's really more focused on the organization making sure to honor the people who are a part of it. But I guess if the question is it better to take a job where you make a lot of money but you hate where you go to work, or take a job that you make less money but you feel honored, respected, that you're learning and valued? That's a personal choice that people need to make. I mean, I would certainly take the latter. I mean, I think that's what we continue to do in our organization because we make plenty of choices that don't enrich us, but that we feel good about. And I'm not saying we're so great. It's just those are the decisions that we make because it's what matters to us.
Right. And Ari, we want to be very cognizant of your time, so we're going to wrap it up here. But before you go, we know that success is a word that's thrown a lot around a lot today.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it kind of takes on this arbitrary definition. A lot of people have
Yeah.
different perceptions of it in their mind. So, something we've been asking our guests is, how have you defined success throughout your career, and what does success mean to you today?
Well, I think success ultimately is living essentially the vision and values that you wrote for yourselves. So if your vision is to be a Buddhist monk and have no possessions, then and you're doing that and you feel good about it, that's awesome. If your vision is to be a gazillionaire, then that's awesome, and you're doing it, that's awesome too. So if the whole point of the visioning work is that it's an inside out exercise, it's not trying to figure out what the market wants, although that might be embedded in it, but it's really more designing the future of your dreams, right? So some people want to have a relationship and have 20 kids, and some people don't want kids. Some people want to live in the city, some people want to live in the country, and there's merit to all of them. It's just, how do you create a life that fits with what you truly want to do? And the visioning process, which we didn't really talk about, but I wrote a lot about in the books, is very much how you tap into that. And it's really my strong belief that we all, although we agonize a lot, we actually know in our heart what we already want. It's just that the voices of our family, our parents, society, etc., are so strong that we lose track of what's kind of a quiet voice still buried down in there. So I think that's what success is. I mean, the funny thing is, in the context of hierarchical thinking, is that people assign the title of being you are a success, which I think is inappropriate and ineffective, because we're all failing and succeeding simultaneously all the time. Witness the current situation. And then also, I should say, for people who have more questions, my email, as you know, is ari@zingermans.com. And then if they want to buy the books, they're on zingtrain.com.
There you go.
Read his books. They're incredible.
Thank you so much, Ari. This has been super
Awesome.
insightful.
Yeah, thank you, man.
This has been really helpful to us, and I'm sure our audience is going to get a ton of value out of this.
All right. Well, let's hope we see each other again in human.
Absolutely.
In human form.
And next time
Yes.
we're enabled to come back to Ann Arbor, we'd love to come meet you in person.
We'll be hitting up Zingermans for sure.
All right, you got it, man. We'll have coffee.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ari.
Thank you, guys. Take good care.
You too.
Thank you for tuning into the Power of Two podcast. Ethan and I are two college students looking to inspire our generation and the ones to follow by sharing the stories of unique individuals. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to share it and follow us on Instagram @Baim Brothers for exclusive content. You can also check us out on baimbrothers.com for more information. Catch us on the next episode of The Power of Two. Peace.